Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom, dude.
And I'm going to say my favorite saying as usual. This is an interesting Torah portion. Very interesting. And it's entitled Beshalach. Beshalach. And it means, many explanations of what it means when he's sent away. And is one definition. And so in my Torah, it's divided into 4 sections. The entire Torah portion is taken from Exodus 13th chapter, 17th verse, to the 17th chapter, 16th verse. And the 4 sections, the first one is Rescue at Sea, Exodus 13th chapter, 17th verse, to the 14th chapter, 31st verse. Shirah, the song, at the sea, Exodus 15th chapter, 1st to the 24th verse. In the wilderness, Exodus 15th chapter, 22nd through the 16th chapter to the 36th verse. And foes and friends, Exodus 17th chapter, verse 1 through 17th chapter, verse 16. V'yehi Beshalach paro et ha'am ve'lo nacham Elohim derek eretz Pilishtim. Ki karov, ki hu amar Elohim pen yen ham, ha'am bir otam milchama. Now when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer, for God said the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt.
Psalm 117. O praise the Lord, all ye nations. Praise him, all ye people. For his merciful kindness is great towards us, and the truth of the Lord endures forever. Praise ye the Lord. This is the word of the Lord. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. May your kingdom come. May your will be done. We give thanks to you, Lord, for your great love towards us, for delivering us from bondage, for delivering your children of Egypt, children of Israel out of the bondage of Egypt, and bringing them through and birthing them into a new nation, to give them a faith and a courage, and to give them a new way of life and a new beginning as you as their foundation, to teach them the ways of God and the character of God. For God has brought them from death into life, and made them free, and gave them a sign of their freedom, that they should rest on the Sabbath day and not do work, that they should rejoice in it and do what is pleasing to them. And Christ has come to die and to shed his blood for us, to free us also from the penalty of sin, that we may be free as well, free to do as we please, and free to enjoy the God, and to learn and live of his character and to live in it. And may we, Lord, find merit to stand in your presence and to be with you throughout all eternity. This we pray in the name of our Christ Jesus. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotze lechem means ha'art. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who gives us bread from the earth. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam berei pri hagathan. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who gives us the fruit of the vine. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Right, we have a continuation from last week's Parsha entitled Bo. And again, Moses is leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. There's observing the Passover. And now we come to the rest of the journey as they're heading out of Egypt. And the first section of the Torah, Rescue at Sea, Exodus 13th chapter 17th verse to the 14th chapter 31st verse. I'll read that, and then you can read the second part, and we'll have a break after that. Now when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although it was near. For God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people round about by the way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. Now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt. And, oh wow. Yeah, I saw that before, but let me make a note of that. They went up armed. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I knew that before, but I was looking for... okay. They went up armed out of the land of Egypt, and Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who had exacted an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will be sure to take notice of you. Then you shall carry up my bones from here with you. They set out from Sukkoth and encamped at Etham, at the edge of the wilderness. The Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdal and the sea, but before Baal-Zephon, and you shall encamp facing it by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are astray in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may assert my authority against Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people and said, what is this that we have done, releasing Israel from our service? He ordered his chariots and took his men with him. And he took 600 of his picked chariots and the rest of the chariots of Egypt, with officers in all of them. The Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he gave chase to the Israelites. As the Israelites were departing boldly, the Egyptians gave chase to them, and all the chariot horses of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his warriors overtook them encamped by the sea, near Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-Zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, 'Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians'? For it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Have no fear. Stand by and witness the deliverance which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today you will never see again. The Lord will battle for you. You hold your peace." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward, and you lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it, so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they go in after them. And I will assert by my authority against Pharaoh and all his warriors, his chariots, and his horsemen. Let the Egyptians know that I am the Lord, when I assert my authority against Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." The angel of God who has been going ahead of the Israelite army now moved and followed behind them, and the pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took up a place behind them. And it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel. Thus there was the cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that the one could not come near the other all through the night. Then Moses held out his arm over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night, and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split, and the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. And the Egyptians came in pursuit after them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horse chariots and horsemen. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud, and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He locked the wheels of their chariots, so they moved forward with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians and upon their chariots and upon their horsemen." Moses held out his arm over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state, and the Egyptians fled at its approach. But the Lord hurled the Egyptians into the sea. The waters turned back and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Pharaoh's entire army that had followed after them in the sea, not one of them remained. But the Israelites marched through the sea on dry ground. The waters formed a wall for them on their right and on their left. Thus the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea. And when Israel saw the wondrous power which the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. They had faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Before I begin my explanation of my thoughts, I want to talk about, remind you what's going on here in the Torah, in the whole Bible, what God is trying to do. There was sin, Adam and Eve sinned, and as a result of sin, death came into the world. And because death came into the world, and because we had sinned and we were separated from God, God made a way for us to be reunited with him. And the way that he made for us to be reunited with him is through Messiah, Jesus, or Yeshua. In order for Jesus to be born, there had to be a nation of Israel. And it had to be in the land of Israel. They had to be in the land of Israel, because Jesus had to be born, according to the prophets, in the land of Israel, in Bethlehem, to be precise. And so here we have almost like a play going on. This is a rehearsal for what is to come for the birth of Messiah. Remember, if you've ever heard that Joseph what's called Messiah ben David. I'm sorry, there are like two Messiahs. One is Messiah ben David, the suffering, ben Joseph, the suffering Messiah. And then the second Messiah, second personality of the Messiah is Messiah ben David, who is the conquering Messiah. If you see in all of this, God is trying to get Israel back to the land for the Messiah to be born. I contend and I say to you that God is doing this again. He is once again trying to get his people Israel back into the land, which we call Aliyah. When Jewish people go back to the land permanently, they call it Aliyah. Aliyah means to go up. Whenever you come down from Jerusalem, you're coming down. When you go up to Jerusalem, it's Aliyah. So I believe that in this time that God is again trying to get the Jewish people to return to the land so that the Messiah can come. And I was surprised again to see, although I saw it before, it says, now the Israelites went up armed, and that's verse 18, out of the land of Egypt. And I noted that they remembered to take Joseph's bone, because Joseph asked them, when you go up, take my bones with you. Now, in some of my commentary, and it matches up with what some of the prophets are saying about when Israel does return the second time to the land, that not all the people went. And it's a Hebrew word here that they had and it's in verse 18, I believe, the Hebrew word, and it was saying it could mean a fifth, because it's Hanashim, but it also could mean a lot of things, but they think it meant that not all the people came out of the land, came out of Egypt.
Some just stayed back.
Some they stayed back for whatever reason, but they didn't come out. Mm-hmm. And in the prophets, if you read the prophets, and the prophets also talk about when Israel goes back to the land this time, said not all will go back. Mm-hmm. For a number of reasons. Some will not believe they should go back. But a very, I don't say very small part, but not all of them will go back, and the prophets speak to that. So the same thing happened here, that all of the Israel that was supposed to come out came out, but there were some that remained behind, and that's what some of the commentators agree on. And again, I'm trying to draw parallels here. There's nothing new under the sun. That this is a parallel of what is going on now. That this is real. The Torah is real. It's living and it's breathing, and it's living and breathing. It's not way back in the past. Today, the same thing is going on. In verse 4 of chapter 14, it said that I will stiffen Pharaoh's hearts. Then he will pursue me, and I will assert my authority, that the Egyptians know that I am the Lord. And some of the Hebrew, they said that the word could also be translated as in that the Lord will be glorified. Mm-hmm. I love verse 13, because because God told him what he said: have no fear, and stand by, and that he would deliver. The Lord will work for you today. Okay, now keep that in mind. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. And then in verse 19, it talks about the angel of the Lord. Instead of going in the front, he goes in the back, and they stave off the army of Egypt from the army of Israel all night. And so then, the army of Israel. And again, I looked it up, I said, hear it again. Here's Israel referred to as an army, Machane. And then then another thing I thought was amazing, and this is speaking to us today. It says in verse 24, when it said that the Egyptians looked and saw what God was doing, because God stopped the the wheels of the chariots from going forward. And so when the Egyptians saw that it wasn't the Israelites doing it, they said, the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Remember that. In verse 25, it says he locked the wheels. It says God locked it. It didn't say Israel locked it. It said God locked it. And in verse 30, it said the Lord delivered Israel. Same theme, where God is doing the fighting. He did ask Moses to hold up his arms over the sea, that the water may come back. But I don't know why he needed Moses, but for some reason he wanted Moses involved in this process. But before that, it says God is fighting for Israel. Any other thoughts?
Well, that's quite a bit you said there. I have some. Here we are seeing as the children of Israel go from Egypt through the Red Sea and going in on the other side. Some of the commentators show it as going from one reality to another reality. Mm-hmm. Okay. Some also said this is almost like the birth process, where the child, I guess, is in the womb as depicted by Egypt, and it comes through the canal, the birth canal, and it is born on the other side. Where at one point, free will is suspended. You know, there's a point of free will up until the time that child enters that birth canal. But once that child enters the birth canal, I may be saying more than I know. Once it enters the birth canal, then it's going to be born. There's nothing can stop it. So this is also a part of showing. You mentioned the word redemption. Mm-hmm. Redemption comes through suffering. So they're being redeemed and they're coming out new. The idea of, well, two ideas as to why God took them in a roundabout way to get to the promised land. One, they said, God said, well, they may become afraid and won't fight. And chances are, you know, I'm not going to dispute what God said, but the people still had a slave mentality. Mm-hmm. So they didn't see themselves as being free. They saw themselves as slaves, and they probably wouldn't fight their master. Mm-hmm. Even though they weren't armed, they had arms, and there were 600,000 men. Mm-hmm. They could have, and let's say not all of them going to fight, at least 400,000. That's almost like 500,000 men. Mm-hmm. Could you think they would defeat the Egyptian army quite easily? But maybe they didn't. But they didn't, for fear. But God, and I'm going to jump ahead on this one a little, God took them in a roundabout way. Well, all the plagues that happened inside of Egypt. Mm-hmm. The only nation that knew how great God was at that time was Egypt. Mm-hmm. None of the other nations knew about it. So by God taking them to a roundabout way and across the Red Sea, or Reed Sea, all the other nations lived around the Reed Sea. Mm-hmm. And see, when they saw that water splitting, this is more captured in the song of Moses. When they saw the great power of God, mm-hmm. they became afraid too. Mm-hmm. So not only did the Egyptian, one nation, see the power of God, mm-hmm. the whole world saw the power mm-hmm. of God. Mm-hmm. So that's probably an additional reason why he took them in this roundabout way. Mm-hmm. So all the nation would see the power of God.
And I could buy that. I could buy that. That makes good sense, because it makes so much good sense. Because yes, it to us it seems so simple. We want to take a straight line, but God said, no, I got something else in mind for this. Yes. Sure. Okay.
Yeah. All the nations should see the power of God, and that there's something new that's taking place.
Yes.
In the old days, under the old, how should I say it, society, slaves were acceptable. Mm-hmm. They are seeing God free a people
Yes.
From one
Yes.
nation to another. So
Yes.
what is playing out here is the end of slavery, the end of this slave war into a society where people are free.
Mm-hmm.
So that's being played out as well. And the one other thing too I mentioned is water and how basic water is.
Mm-hmm.
During the process of creation, water wasn't created.
Mm-hmm.
Water was already there.
Mm-hmm.
And when the waters were separated, then plant life appeared. But water is very basic to the foundation of the earth. Some think of water as being the state of purity, that kind of thing. Passing through the water. Even when we're baptized, we think of baptism as kind of a death and you're being raised into life.
Mm-hmm.
So even that's consistent. I mentioned about the army now, and I did mention that God led them in a roundabout way through the Red Sea,
Mm-hmm.
and at the splitting of the sea. Let's see. But it was to show the power of God to the whole world, not just to the nation of Egypt. Yep. Now, what other comments do I have here? Well, we mentioned earlier what I will talk did last time when Moses, well, actually the people cried out to Moses at the head of the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And then they cried to Moses, and Moses wanted to pray. And God said, no, it's not time for a long prayer, it's time for a short prayer. And that they were going from slavery into freedom. One other thing about a short prayer, God said, not necessarily about the short prayer, God told him to have the people show the initiative. They should move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the teachers, I don't know if I agree with him or not, but since he kind of qualified, says on a simple level, he says God will only do after we do first. God will only do something after we do it first.
Well, I think that's a theme throughout here where remember when I talked about God stopping the wheels of the thing? But at one point, he's telling Moses to raise your hand.
Right, okay.
So he wanted involvement from Moses for whatever reasons.
Okay.
Maybe that kind of...
Oh, okay. I thought I would get some disagreement on that.
No. God wanted involvement from Moses. He does want us involved. Now, some of that, God didn't need us, but I'm saying, my point is, now God did all of that, and the Egyptians said, God is fighting for them.
Right, okay.
But at some point, God did want involvement because he tells Moses to raise his hand.
He was using Moses to show the people.
Right.
He can use a person.
Mm-hmm.
They always thought God was over it, but God wanted to let them know that he can use people to do things.
Right. Which is in the opposite of what the pagans did, where the gods did everything.
Right.
So
you're right.
This is to show that humans are to initiate certain actions, and God will follow through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, God will lay out all the plans of salvation, but if we don't accept it,
right.
You don't get saved.
That's very good. That's a very good point, I think,
Yeah.
because again, if we want to look at this right here in its totality, we don't want to look at it. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you're myopic, if you're just looking through a little hole right there, but you don't see the peripheral stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In studying this, we want to look at the peripheral, the stuff on the side. We want to look at the whole picture. Right. We're just not looking at an exodus from Egypt. We're also looking at redemption, an exodus from sin to life. This is what this is all about.
Well, a new world order.
Yes.
It's the...
Like you said, and imagine the whole world probably knew, Egypt has these slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And then if these slaves somehow are let go
Sure.
through the power, then
Yeah.
Egypt should be shaken in the boots,
Yeah.
because the other nation's probably going to say, oh, they're weak, or for some reason like that.
And they're gonna lose their slaves too.
Yeah, yes. That-
Hopefully, well, that's the idea.
Yes.
It's for freedom.
It's for freedom. It's for freedom.
Yeah.
And let me point out one thing before I lose it, because I want us to see the whole picture of this. That this is a picture of redemption,
Mhm.
and this first redemption where God redeemed Israel from Egypt, and He takes them to the land. What happens? Pharaoh pursues them.
Mm-hmm.
Pursues them because he doesn't want them to get to the land. On a bigger note, the ultimate enemy of God doesn't want Israel to get to the land so the Messiah can be born.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think part of that hardening of Pharaoh's heart is that the ultimate enemy of God, Hasatan, Satan, doesn't want the Messiah to be born and knows that this nation is released and allowed to go back to this place of Israel. The Messiah will be born.
Yes.
Bring it down to today. Let's bring it down to today. We, as believers, our hope is that our Messiah is returning. According to the prophets, they said, Jesus says, he said, I will not, Jesus said this, he said, I will not return until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who returns in the name of the Lord. And in order for the Lord to return and for Israel to say that, they have to be in the land. And this is what's going on today. Now they're being pursued. They've been pursued throughout the ages. Most recently, the most horrible thing is the Holocaust, where they were pursued and then forbidden to go back to the land. They were forbidden to go back to the land. Mm-hmm. They tried to get there, but they were, and then they were killed. Don't you know that the ultimate enemy of God doesn't want them in the land because he knows this? So this is what we're talking about. This is not something, a story that takes place thousands of years ago, has nothing to do with us today. It has everything to do with what's happening today.
He doesn't want the power to come back.
Exactly. Because the ultimate enemy...
If they start worshiping God like they did before.
Exactly.
There's going to be a lot of fear.
The ultimate enemy doesn't want it. So if we look at it in that sense, we know what's happening here. And that makes what we are called to do even just as important as what Moses did here in Egypt, where he's leading the people out of the land. Today, we've been called to do that too. The scriptures clearly say that the nations are going to bring those people back to Israel. They say it very clearly. So anyway, very good. This is very good. Things are fitting together. Anything else? I'm sorry.
I have nothing else so far.
Okay, let's go on to part 2, and then after part 2, we'll take a break. Part 2 is entitled, hold up. It's the song. It's Shirah. Shirah in Hebrew is song. The song at the sea. Exodus 15, verse 1 through 21. You want to read that, John?
Yeah, sure. Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and he is become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him an habitation. My Father God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host has he cast into the sea. His chosen captains also were drowned in the reed sea. The depths have covered them. They sank into the bottom as a stone. Thy right hand, O God, is become glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Lord, has dashed in pieces the enemy. And in the greatness of thine excellence thou hast overthrown them, and rose up against thee. That rose up against thee. Thou sendest forth thy wrath, which consumed them as stubble, and with the blast of thy nostrils the water which gathered together, the flood stood upright as a heap, and the depths were congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My lust shall be satisfied upon thee. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. Thou didst blow with thy wind, the sea covered them. They sank as lead into the mighty waters. Who is like unto thee, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praise, doing wonders? Thou stretchest out thy right hand, the earth swallowed them. Thou in thy mercy have led forth the people which thou hast redeemed. Thou hast guided them in thy strength unto thy holy habitation. The people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold of the inhabitants of Palestina.
Philistia.
Philistia?
Mm-hmm.
Then the dukes of Edom shall be amazed. The mighty men of Moab, trembling shall take hold unto them all. All the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. Fear and dread shall fall upon them by the greatness of thine arm. They shall be as still as a stone till thy people pass over. O Lord, till the people pass over, which thou hast purchased. Thou shalt bring them in and plant them in the mountains of thine inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which thou made for thee to dwell in the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hand have established. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. For the horse of Pharaoh went in with his chariot and with his horsemen into the sea, and the Lord brought again the waters of the sea upon them. But the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. And Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dance. And Miriam answered them, Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his riders has he thrown into the sea. This is the part I mentioned earlier, why God took this roundabout way why the crossing of the Reed Sea was so significant and why it was necessary, just to show the greatness of God and his power. This song of Moses, I'm told the English translation doesn't do it justice. Two things this song mentioned is redemption and being repurchased. So in this song, perhaps it does do it justice, because it says the Lord spoke, saying that they will sing unto the Lord, which is future tense. I guess they were singing it now, and they will also sing it into the future. So this is a glimpse into eternity that many speak about, what this song is talking about, not just now, but also in the future. it's when they will be singing this song where God has triumphed. A couple other things that are very interesting in this song, and this was the there was another saying, I guess the Sikhs or the seers interpret this somewhat different, and what they're saying is that how they interpret, they will say, God will give you bread, but you must plow first. I think it still goes back to what I mentioned before, that man must show the initiative. Saying is, God will give you bread, but you must plow first. Also indicates that God is empowering his nation to take some type of action. In this particular verse in 14 and 15. Israel prayed, Moses prayed, and God responded. God's response was, why don't you take the initiative? And after they crossed over the sea on dry land, they sang praises to God. One other interesting part that was there, word, and I was tempted to say my Bible doesn't do it justice, but it may. It speaks of a habitation, and not just the temple, but speaking of we being the temple of God, and that's where God will rest within us. So, see, I will prepare him an habitation. Mm-hmm. So, not necessarily the temple itself, but I'm sure it was some reference to the temple, but it's referring to us, preparing God a place in us to live and dwell. And if God dwells in us, he will never die. So, very interesting saying here. And the part of you must plow, and God will give you bread, but you must plow, seems to be at odds with these verses, but it tends to make sense. When, as the Sikhs would say.
The who?
I think the Sikhs.
No,
not seers.
Seers, probably.
Seers. Okay.
Not Sikhs. No.
All right. Okay. All right. So that's what I have for now.
What I had, very good. I think the English does not do the Hebrew justice in this song. If I can remember, if maybe you read this, they said the way the poem is laid out in the Hebrew, it's laid out so that there are like two walls on each side, and in the middle is a line. And they say that signifies what God did at the Red Sea by having the two walls of water and the people going through. And you have to see the Hebrew to know this. I like verse 2 where it says, the Lord is my strength and has become my salvation, which in Hebrew it says le Yeshua. Yeshua is salvation. It's the name that we call Jesus, is salvation. And in one of the commentators I was listening to said that the waters, when the blast of God's nostrils, the waters piled up and the flood stood like a wall. Well, he was saying that was frozen. And I said, what is he talking about? Well, in verse 8, it says that. He says, the flood stood straight like a wall, and the deeps froze in the heart of the sea. So I said, well, maybe it did freeze. It was a frozen wall of water. And the 17th verse, which I think is a messianic verse, which is a future verse, and it's a future in the sense that, yes, in this sense that God is taking Israel to plant them on his mountain. That again is happening where God is trying to take Israel from out of the nations, because they were never meant to be in the nations. And it says here in the 17th verse, the song says, you will bring them, meaning God will bring them and plant them on your own mountain. The mountain of God is in Jerusalem. The place you made to dwell in, Jerusalem. The sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands established, Jerusalem. And said the Lord will reign forever and ever. And in Revelations, it says that where God will bring down New Jerusalem, and he will be with man forever and ever. So again, yes, we're talking about a past event here, but we're also looking to the future where God is bringing his people back to that holy mountain. Anything else? We'll take a break because you can bring it up again. You always have your notes.
Well, I finished most of them. I got a couple more. Okay.
We'll take a short break, and then we'll conclude this Torah portion. And I would hope, as I was studying and reading more, I said God is never stagnant. He's never still. He's always moving. He's living, breathing. And that what he's doing here is a blueprint for what he's doing now and this time that we're in. And it just really hit home to me. I think today, as I was studying during the week, it didn't hit so much. But today I'm saying, God, this is the same thing that's happening to God's people today, where he's trying to bring them back. Well, he is bringing them back. He's not trying to bringing them back to the land. But that Egypt of today, the Egyptians of the day, are trying to stop him. Are trying to destroy the nation of Israel. Don't want him to bring them back to the land. So we know how important this is to God. And this is something, if this is so important to God, it's almost like what God said to Moses. Why are you crying out to me? Go ahead. If we know that this is important to God, we need to go ahead and do this. That's all I got to say on that. Let's take a break. Okay, we'll go on to the next section, which is entitled In the Wilderness, Exodus 15th chapter, 22nd verse, so through the 16th chapter, 36th verse. Then, excuse me. Then Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went on into the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. That is why it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There he made for them a fixed rule, and there he put them to the test. He said, "If you will heed the Lord your God diligently, doing what is upright in his sight, giving ear to his commandments, and keeping all his laws, then I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer." And they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. They encamped there beside the water. Setting out for Elim, the whole Israelite community came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after their departure from the land of Egypt. In the wilderness, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death." And the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may thus test them, to see whether they will follow my instructions or not. But on the 6th day, when they prepare what they have brought in, it shall prove to be double the amount they gather each day. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, by evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall behold the presence of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against the Lord. For who are we that you shall grumble against us? Since it is the Lord, Moses continued, who will give you flesh to eat in the evening, and bread in the morning to the full? Because the Lord has heard the grumblings you utter against him. What is our part? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole Israelite community, advance toward the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as Aaron spoke to the whole Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there in a cloud appeared the presence of the Lord. The Lord spoke to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Speak to them and say, by evening you shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread, and you shall know that I, the Lord, am your God. In the evening quail appeared and covered the camp. In the morning there was a fall of dew about the camp. When the fall of the dew lifted, there over the surface of the wilderness lay a fine and flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, that is the bread which the Lord has given to you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you requires to eat, an omer to a person for as many of you as there are. Each of you shall fetch for those in his tent. The Israelites did so, some gathering much, some little. But when they measured it by the omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little had no deficiency. They had gathered as much as they needed to eat. And Moses said to them, let no one leave any of it over until morning. But they paid no attention to Moses. Some of them left of it until morning, and it became infested with maggots and stank. And Moses was angry with them. So they gathered it every morning, each as much as he needed to eat. When the sun grew hot, it would melt. On the sixth day they gathered double the amount of food, 2 omers for each. And when all the chieftains of the assembly came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a day of rest, a holy Sabbath of the Lord. Bake what you would bake and boil what you would boil, and all that is left put aside to be kept until morning. So they put it aside until morning as Moses had ordered, and it did not turn foul, and there were no maggots in it. Then Moses said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath of the Lord. You will not find it today on the plain. 6 days you shall gather it, and on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. Yet some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found nothing. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you men refuse to obey my commandments and my teachings? Mark that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore he gives you 2 days' food on the 6th day. Let everyone remain where he is. Let no man leave his place on the 7th day. So the people remained inactive on the 7th day. The house of Israel named it manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and it tasted like wafers and honey. Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let 1 omer of it be kept throughout the ages, in order that they may see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out from the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put 1 omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout the ages. As the Lord had commanded Moses, Aaron placed it before the pact to be kept. And the Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a settled land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. The omer is the 10th of an ephah. This is, I think this is I think very, oh wow, I can't even put it into words. Let me start with my notes first. What really stood out to me is that they found no water. Again, this theme of water. And John was talking about that, the water, what the water means. And it says they complained, the people grumbled against Moses, but Moses cried out to the Lord. And again, that's the same theme that was happening when God saved Israel from Egypt. He said that he had heard the people crying out to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then God says to them in verse 26 that if you will heed me, if you will do what I say, then and keep my commandments, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. And then in verse 3, here again, verse 3 of 16, and they said, the Israelites said, if they came to they grumbled again against Moses and Aaron. And then they said, and then I think this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. They said, the Israelites said, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, and so forth. I think that was a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'll tell you why later. Okay. In verse 4, it says that bread rained down from the sky. Bread, okay, I think this has more than a connotation of bread that you physically eat for the body. I believe it had reference to Yeshua, because Yeshua is also referred to as being the bread of life. Okay, in verse 15, it says that the manna, when they asked, what is this manna? And they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. Again, to me, I thought this meant more than this bread that they were talking about. I think that here Moses was talking about the bread of life, the ultimate bread of life, and that's Yeshua. Because in my commentary, it said it was a substitute for grain. And then in my notes, I put down here that Yeshua was given as a substitute to cover our sins. Okay. All right. And then in verse 23, and again, where I become just really emotional, where God is speaking to the nation of Israel. But remember, God has always said when he gives these laws, there's one law for Israel and one law for the stranger. And God said he was giving them this edict about the Sabbath to test them, to see if they would do what he said. And he clearly said, gather what you would on the other 5 days, but on the 6th day, you gather a double amount, because the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord. And in my commentary, the commentator said that, and I believe that the Sabbath has been known since Adam. They forgot it because they were slaves. When you're a slave, you don't have a Sabbath. So in essence, Moses is reminding them about this Sabbath that God instituted back in creation. And so they didn't listen again. And what did they do? They went out. Some went out on the 7th day together. And when they found nothing, the Lord said to Moses, how long will men refuse to obey my commandments, my teachings? And I think that's what God is saying today. How long will you refuse to obey my command? And especially as the Sabbath, how long will you refuse to do that? And in the 4th verse, the end of my note, no, 23rd, I think 23rd. No, in the 4th verse. No, I think that's it. Yeah, these other notes are for the next section. So I ended in a 20. Yeah, I think my last comment was basically about the Sabbath again, about God asking him a question, and I think he's asking it today. How long will you continue to refuse? Well, he said, how long will you men refuse to obey my commandments and my teaching? Anybody else?
I didn't focus on that part per se. I was thinking more of, well, let me just list them in order, the way they were written. when they ran out of water, and I'm sorry, where the water was bitter, and God gave commands, and some of the teachers say that the commands from God makes the water sweet. And another thing too, they probably had about a 30-day food supply when they left Egypt, and the food ran out. Now what God is wanting to teach them, well, one, if they will obey him, and two, he wants them to depend on him. And at least the dependent part came easy because the manna was supplied, the quail was supplied, and well, the manna and the quail was supplied. Also, nature changed to bring this miracle about. And I say that because bread came down from heaven, and dew came up from the earth. Normally you get bread from the earth, not from heaven. So basically bread came down from heaven and the dew came up from the earth. Some are saying that, well, it's used to protect it from, you know, dirt and other things like that. And that's okay, they may have a point there. But this is, I think this scripture is designed to test and to make us, or the nation of Israel, dependent upon God and upon his word. The part about the Sabbath, when the guy went out to grab to get bread, at first I said maybe he just didn't know what day it was. That may have been a stretch, but I said, well, maybe, and if let's say he didn't know what day it was, well, God just gave him a new calendar, and we're to take our time seriously. And he didn't, if he didn't know that it wasn't a Sabbath day, he's not taking God's time, the new order or God's time seriously. He's being somewhat flippant when it comes to dealing with God. He's not taking him seriously, which means if you don't take him seriously, you won't obey him. So we should take the time that God gives us serious.
Yes.
So, that's all I have for that now.
All right. I think anything. Okay. Well, this is okay. I'm going to the next part, and then we'll, because my notes from the next part isn't that long, and my notes it's just a few verses, so I'll read it. It's the next part is entitled Foes and Friends, Exodus 17th chapter, 1st verse through the 16th verse.
You want me to read that?
Okay, go ahead.
Right. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journey according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses, and said, Give us water, that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, Why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water. And the people murmured against Moses, and said, Wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, What shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, wherewith thou smote the river. Take in thy hand and go. Behold, I will stand before thee upon the rock in the Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of that place Massa and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? Then came Abimelech and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, Choose us out men, and go out fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the mountain with the rod of God in mine hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the mountain, top of the hill. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Abimelech prevailed. Amalek, excuse me. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, and the one on one side and the other on the other side, with his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek, excuse me, and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, Write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ear of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar, and called the name of it Jehovah Nisi. For he said, Because the Lord has sworn that the Lord shall have war with Amalek from generation to generation. So Amalek was a representation of evil, and he won't go away. One other thing I did not mention, and this is part of it too, when the people, they ran out of water again, and they go up and say, we're going to die in this wilderness. The time they said we didn't have food, and they talked about the food they ate in Egypt, one teacher says, there were slaves in Egypt. What do you mean did they have all that food in Egypt? They probably didn't.
No, they didn't.
They didn't. They were not romancing about something. I don't know exactly what. Now, this last chapter is very interesting and somewhat perplexed, and my understanding, the English doesn't do it justice. Maybe I'll take the last part first. I may come back to it again. When it mentions the name Amalek, and it mentions the word God, the names are truncated. They're not complete. And the teaching is that God is not in this world completely, because evil is in this world, and that God will not fully or completely be in this world until Amalek is destroyed.
It's taken out, yeah.
Yeah. So the last verse, God raises battle against Amalek, or Amalek's throne. And the name of God is translated. The sages say that it is because as long as Amalek is in this world, God's throne is not completely here.
Exactly.
and God as well. So if it's God's throne is not completely here, God is not completely here. It is up to us to drive out evil out of the world. Until that is done, God's throne will not completely be in the world. And we talked about this story. I may not have enough time to do it. We talked about this story, or the saying. It says, charity brings, charity saves from death. Was a story one of the teachers told, or the saying that was used. And let me mention it later on. But the saying, charity saves from death. Now, let's see, what else?
Well, when later are you going to mention the story? Why don't you just tell the story?
Tell the story now. Okay. The story goes back, I guess the teacher read this story, and it spoke of a family, a man, a wife, and a son, and this was the early 19th century. A very poor Jewish family that lived on the east side, must have been New York, may have been New York. And each Shabbat, one of the traditions to invite a guest for Shabbat dinner. And the son would ask him why, and he would say, charity saves from death. And the son didn't understand it, but it was his responsibility. It was his task to find a guest for Shabbat. And he said that sometimes the guest stayed over, and sometimes the guest didn't smell that good. But at least he did invite them over. I also said that during the week they ate herring. To me, I would think herring is pretty good, but maybe herring is not very good. So every night they had herring. On Shabbat, they had chicken. And they had to share the chicken. So one day the mother got sick. It was on a Friday. The mother got sick, coughing up blood, and the father took her to the hospital. And he reminded the son, don't forget the Shabbat guest. So husband comes back, and they have the Shabbat dinner. And afterwards, I guess the son couldn't sleep, so he went out on the fire escape, and then he saw his dad out there. And his dad had his head in his hand, and he said, gee, Dad, I think I finally realized what that saying means. Charity saves from death. It means that mom will come home, mom will not die. So the father says, is that what you think that means? He says, no, that isn't what that means. What it means is God will not die. As long as we bring the presence of God into this world, he will not die. So charity bringing God into this world means we bring in God's loving kindness, we bring in God's goodness, and as long as God's loving kindness and God's goodness is in this world, God will not die. So the expression of the story, charity saves from death. It's not the death of us, as the father said. It's not the death of us. It's not the death of your mom. It's the death of God. When we stop expressing charity, God dies. Mm-hmm. And it kind of ties in with Amalek, in that in order for God to fully come into this world, Amalek has to die. Mm-hmm. So I hope that wasn't too long.
No, I thought that was good. I wanted you to tell the story.
Oh, okay.
Because then I'll tell this part that I've been taught in some of the congregations I've been in. They said that the reason that the Jewish people exist now, even though they've been hunted down, is because they keep the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. And so they were told, the sages told them that it is, yes, the Jewish people are keeping the Sabbath, but in effect, the Sabbath is keeping the Jewish people.
Oh, okay.
Should the Jewish people stop keeping the Sabbath, then Amalek will really have taken over, mm-hmm. and they will be destroyed. So that's one reason or the reason why the Sabbath is so important. Because if you can imagine no one keeping the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath. And you think about that one. Go home and you think about that one. You think that people who keep who go to church on Sunday and disregard the seventh day, do you think they're holding this world together? I don't think so. Because the commandment from God was, what did he tell Israel? To keep the seventh day. It is holy. It is a rest day. It honors God. It shows him as creator and sovereign of the universe if you keep the seventh day. And so I think that falls into your story. Again, the Jewish people are, and no matter how nominal the Jewish person may be, they may not be real strong in their faith, but I bet you they're keeping a Shabbat. They're going somewhere for a Shabbat. And most of Christianity has no idea what Shabbat means. They've heard of Seventh-day Adventists and all that, but they don't know what the Shabbat meant in the commands that God gave to Israel. If you even mention it, you'll get a blank expression. And that's not good, because that means Amalek is taking over. Evil is taking over. Anything else you want to say?
No, just that one point, but that's it.
Well, one of my notes was, again, Moses cries out to God in verse 4 when they complain. Again, I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When Israel says to Moses, why did you bring us here to kill us? I mean, it's almost like they know that they are not going to enter into the land. Remember, they're not going to go. And what they said before, it says, we wish we would have died. Yeah. What a thing to say. And they did die in the wilderness.
They lost faith.
Yeah.
Yes. And they died. What a thing to say.
They turned on God.
Yes. And so the next thing is that I wrote is, again, Massa. It's called Massa and Meribah. Massa means trial, and Meribah means quarrel. There was that quarrel between Moses and the people. So remember that. And again, Amalek. Again, John said this is evil, and Amalek is Israel has always and will have to contend with Amalek until Amalek is wiped off this earth. And the name that God is given here, it says Adonai Nisi. It said the Lord is my banner or my sign. Remember that. That's going to come into play, I think. And so this ends this part right here. We're kind of in the middle of a this fourth part is cut off in the middle, foes and friends. So we'll take it up next week, because the Parsha I'm sorry, I'm starting to. Do you have anything else? I'm sorry.
No.
Barry, no. You have anything? The Parsha for next week is called Yithro or Jethro, and if you remember, Jethro is the father-in-law of Moses. So you can imagine what's going to go on with that, because Jethro ended up giving Moses some very good advice, and I believe this is a long Parsha, if I'm not mistaken here. Yeah, it starts at Exodus 18 verse 1 through Exodus 20th verse 23. Looks like it's pretty long to me. But anyway, doesn't matter. And it starts out V'yishma Yitro Kohen Midian Hotan Moshe et kol asher asa Elohim lamaseh ve'leYisrael amo ki hotzia Adonai et Yisrael mitzrayim. Jethro, priest of Midian, Moses and his father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out from Egypt. Just want to mention that on sundown, sundown on the 30th of January, I think it's sundown to the 30th, to the sundown the 31st is Tu B'Shvat. And Tu B'Shvat is, they call it a festival of the trees and the tree. But remember in the Torah, or maybe in the Torah, God gives a command on what happens when trees are planted, that you don't eat the fruit the first couple of years from this, not first 4 years, I believe, from the tree.
4th year is a sacrifice.
Okay. And so this is sort of of the trees. And my Hebrew teacher told me they even now do a Seder, which is just like they do on Passover. But this is an important time. It's not a major holiday in Israel, but they do plant trees. So just for your information, let you know what that's about. I think we've done a good job. And again, I want to just remind us that, and we're going to look at the whole picture of what God is doing. God brought Israel out of Egypt. He's again bringing Israel from all of the countries where he scattered them back to the land. And if it wasn't important for them to go back, they wouldn't be getting such a big deal over it. But there's a reason that they have to be back in the land, and it is a holy reason that God then will send his Messiah. His Messiah will return. So just like it happened here, where God is trying to get them back to the land, and I'm sure they didn't realize, well, what the heck, we're going to a new land, yeah. But you're going to a new land because the Messiah is going to be born there. So again, the same story is playing out. And matter of fact, it may take too long for me to find out where the scripture is, but you can look it up yourself. When it talks about the return, one of the prophets said that when God returns them again, meaning this time to Israel, it will be something bigger than the first time. That it will be a greater exodus. And you kind of you can kind of see it, because in the exodus from Egypt, they're just coming out of one country. But in the exodus now, there are Jews all over the whole world that need to return to the land of Egypt. The whole world. I mean, there's probably not a nation in this world that doesn't have some Jewish people. And they need to, the nation of Israel. I mean, there's not a nation that doesn't have people from the nation of Israel. Not just Jewish people. Remember, there are 12 tribes. Judah was only one of them. So, and they need to return. And here, like John said, I love you when you said, like, it's like the birth of a baby. At some point, that baby's going to be born. You can't put that baby back in the womb. And we haven't kind of reached that point, but at some point, all the Jews are going to come out of the nations. At some point, they won't have a choice. It'll be like birthing a baby. They can't go back. They'll have to go on to Israel. So this is very real, and this Parsha, again, is messianic. It's very real and very happening now. This is not something way back when. This is now. Okay? We're going to sing this song, and I didn't print it out, but you can, the chorus is, the chorus is, it says, Go Down Moses is the name of the song. It's an old Negro spiritual. And the chorus is, Go down Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell all pharaohs to let my people go. And then when it says, when Israel was in Egypt land, and then there's a phrase, let my people go, oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Then the chorus, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell all Pharaoh to let my people go. So we'll sing just one verse of that. Not one, well, there are two verses. Remember, when Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. And then the chorus, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. I used to think it's tell old Pharaoh. So that's probably the best way to sing it. Okay. When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. And this is real solemn. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And we, out of all the people in the world, should understand this. And especially if you've done any genealogical work, to know that our ancestors were slaves. And there was a major event on many people's parts in order to free them from slavery. And you know it had to be a God thing, because slavery was so entrenched in the society around the world. Mm-hmm. And so here it became important because they supplied a product. They supplied labor. And so this was a big shakeup to have this happen. But as racist as I'm sure most people today would think those people were back then, they weren't. The whole country wasn't so racist that the slaves weren't freed. There must have been enough people who had a heart after the Lord to free those slaves, and that's something to think about. And there William Lord Garrison, I think, is one guy. He had a newspaper that he ran in the Northeast, and he was almost killed many times. This white man who dedicated his life to having the slaves freed, and he almost died. People would come to his meetings. He had to escape more than a couple of times. So we know this right here, where God is calling for his people to return home. And he says to tell Pharaoh, and Pharaoh, I believe, is Amalek, as far as I'm concerned, the spirit of Amalek, who doesn't want to let God's people return, who deceived them into believing that they're better off outside of the land of Israel, that it's too dangerous to be over in Israel. They're deceived into believing that, and they don't know that it's more dangerous to be, they think it's dangerous to be inside of the nation of Israel. And what they don't know is more dangerous to be outside of the nation of Israel. So we're at that point now, and we may not know the particulars of how God is going to move, but they are being moved. God's people are being moved back to the land. And at some point, they won't have a choice. The birth has to come. They have to come out. Just like in Egypt. At some point, they didn't have a choice. They had to come out. So, good Shabbat. And pray that you have a good Shabbat. And think on these things. Pray about them. Pray about how God is going to use you in this particular Exodus. What he's going to do. And so, I say have a good Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. And Shavua Tov. Have a good week.
Shabbat Shalom. Shavua Tov.